Good afternoon, everyone. Today I have with me Collin Plume from noblegoldinvestments.com. We wanted to talk about House Resolution 5404. This is a new resolution to define the dollar as a fixed weight of gold. Also wanted to talk about Bitcoin IRAs, physical bullion, food inflation, and how you can protect your wealth, your assets as we move forward into the grand solar minimum. But my first thing is, why did the U.S. government suddenly decide to define the dollar as a weight of gold? We haven't used gold for years. Gold hasn't even been on the radar, but suddenly it's back on the radar, and you need to ask yourself why. The quirky timing of everything in our news feeds right now. We know the crops are being diminished with the yields due to these out-of-season blizzards and everything happening across the northern hemisphere with extreme cold temperatures through the spring, delaying planting seasons. We're going to try to put a context on this, and I'm happy that I have Collin today because I consider him one of the experts in the physical metals market and how we're moving forward in the future. Collin, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. And yeah, that HR 5404 bill was put forward by Congressman Mooney out of West Virginia, and it's an exciting bill. If you read it, it's finally a bill that an average person can understand, and it makes sense to everyone that reads it. You know, some of the finer points is just talking about what you talk about a lot, which is inflation and the cost of goods eating away at our buying power, which I think that we kind of talked about off air, and it's, you know, something that continues to, people, every time they go to the supermarket, the cost of goods is continuing to go up, and he really talks about that in his bill, that fixing the dollar to gold so that we can't just have this incredible inflation would make things more sustainable and make the average American, and make it easier for them to pay for the increases in the cost of some of these goods. So it's an exciting bill, and you know, we'll see if they are able to get it passed.
Yeah, and speaking of the ease of understanding it, you know, when you get into these legalese documents that are 200, 400, 1,000 pages deep, this is literally 3 pages. Anybody can read it. It's simple in English. Talks about the gold standard back to 1913. Moving forward, it talks about the loss and the erosion by the excessive printing that's going on as well, which really is a kind of a startling thing where they're calling out the Fed for printing too much money.
And I think when you look at, you know, what he talks about, a simple thing that he talks about is that inflation at the government reported 2% per year. When you look at that, every 30 years, 35 years, you lose half of your value, your buying power in the dollar. I think that's not really that long of a time period to, unfortunately, if you keep that money, you keep $10,000 in a bank account, you know, over 30 years, that $10,000 is really worth $5,000, which I think is a real good visual example of how our dollar is being eroded and how our wealth is just being taken from us, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true, because think of us as households. I mean, our spending needs, the way we need to save money, plan for the future, plan for retirement. How do you keep something that has value? You know, myself, I was involved with an ICO last year. I understand the crypto market, and this seems to be one of the new asset classes. And now also, it seems that all gold and silver become new asset classes as well, if we're going to try to peg that and connect it back to the dollar like we did how many decades ago?
You know, we went off the gold standard 1971 with Nixon. You know, when we went off it, he said it would be temporary. And like most policies, that wasn't true. And so we've never been back on it. We've just continued to print money and print money. And that's why we see, you know, our U.S. debt, the actual debt right now is almost $22 trillion, which is, you know, reported. Anyone can see that. You know, our debt is 3 times the next 3 biggest countries in the world. So we have this tremendous bubble out there. And we talk a little bit about this in our ebook that was written by John Williams from shadowstats.com. He's an economist, and he wrote this ebook with us. And he says our unfunded liabilities, which means Medicare, Medicaid, other debts that we have out there, bonds that are out there with other countries, is actually over $100 trillion. This bubble is going to burst. It's going to happen. You know, I think people that aren't ready for it, they're not prepared for this collapse in our currency and the equity markets are going to be hurt pretty bad because it has to happen I think we'll see a collapse in the next 12 months, if not sooner. And that's why people are moving into assets like metals and cryptos, because they need to make enough a return to pay for the increase in goods. You can't keep that $10,000 in a bank account and make 0.25%. Government says inflation is 2%. John Williams says it's 9 or 10% per year. So however you slice it, let's say it's in the middle, it's 5% per year. You have to be able to keep up with the increase in goods, and that's why people are looking at these alternative assets right now to keep up, and so they can continue to buy milk and orange juice and all those things that they need to survive.
Yeah, and we're talking about the shadow stats. When you really look at what's going on globally or within the United States, but even take it to the global level, everything that's reported in the news is underreported. And what's one thing that doesn't really make the national news in the U.S. is the bail-in laws. So you're talking about putting money into a bank as a holding for what most people consider a safe haven. Okay, I'm going to put money in a bank. It's not negative interest as it is in Europe, but if there's a national emergency or if there's a financial crisis like 2008 and 9 again, those banks are allowed to bail in all your savings legally. You don't own that money anymore. You gave it to the bank. They can give it back to you if they deem necessary, or they can keep it and say, sorry, terms of service said you gave us that money.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's why a lot of people that we work with, people like myself, we only keep enough cash just to pay for the bills. You want to have 6 months or so much, kind of saved for that. But everything else you want to have in something tangible or in other investments out there that can get you a return, and also that things that you can move around. The beauty behind metals, having some gold and silver in your home or in one of our safe depositories, secured, segregated, is that it's yours. And I think that there's so few assets today that you own by yourself. That's what people miss. People like the intentions of owning their own items. If your money's tied up in the stock market, if it's tied up in a pension, Social Security, that money is not really yours. Even though maybe you're getting a check every month for now, that could stop. And there's a lot of states that have pensions that are overblown, that eventually will be cut or just taken away. And so getting into assets that you have more control over is what we really talk about here at Noble Gold and Noble Bitcoin is, these assets you own, they're yours. And that's a big reason why people are looking at these assets right now. They want to have control.
And I want to come back to that pension funds underwater. Cryptocurrency, going into the Bitcoin futures, as an asset manager for one of these funds, you're allowed to allocate a certain percentage into some of these more obscure investment instruments. And currently, crypto is considered an obscure investment instrument. So they're allowed to put 2%, 3%, up to 5% in at least some of them. So imagine if you let Bitcoin run to 50,000 US dollars, how much could you reinflate those underwater pension funds? So the conversations we're having are the reins are going to be let off everything to try to reinflate, because the people with a little bit of age, they don't back down. The people with a little bit of wealth, they don't back down. But when your pensions are being cut, you are going to absolutely have some ferocious response to that. So they're trying to buy off the older generation by allowing all of these asset classes to rise in the future, because those are the people who are going to complain the most because they're not getting paid.
And I think you're right. I think that, right now Wall Street is heavily looking, as much as, you see guys like Jamie Dimon, president of Bank of America, say that, Bitcoin's not going to be around. You know that they're investing into it. They have an investment arm that they're investing into mining of cryptos. Fidelity is doing the same thing, even though they don't offer any Bitcoin. You can't buy it from them. They have a crypto fund, and they're supporting mining in China, and you can see it. You can see it on their balance book. So they're coming out and saying, hey, stay with the assets that we're promoting right now, which is our bonds and our annuities and our mutual funds. But behind the scenes for them, for their investment, they're actually putting money there because they know that the blockchain technology is changing the world and will continue to change the world. And they know that the future of using these currencies, Bitcoin is a great example of a currency that is so similar, that the identity of Bitcoin and gold are so similar in that there's a limited supply of it out there. There will only be 21 million coins ever. There's, I think, 18 million or so right now in circulation, and the mining of Bitcoin is slowing down. So it has that inflation hedge that people are looking for in an investment because there's going to be a limited supply there and people are going to want to get their hands on them. And that's why, as you mentioned, 50,000 Bitcoin is very realistic, and a lot of investors, the big money investors, are definitely taking a portion of their portfolio and putting it into cryptos right now.
And if I can come back to Jamie Dimon, remember, this is about 6 months ago when he came out in New York and said, I'm going to fire any trader that's even talking about Bitcoin in my office. But over in Europe, they were the fourth largest buyer during the day. So I think there's a little bit of conflict of interest when Jamie Dimon comes out and says, I'm going to fire my traders in New York, but in Europe, they're the fourth largest buyer. I mean, that's driving the news.
If they had a product that they could offer at it, it would be a different tune, because they know that our crypto product for IRAs is so hot, everybody's talking about it. They just don't have a product because they're so regulated. They don't have anything that they can promote. Once they're able to promote something, they'll create some kind of fund. They'll say it's the safest fund, it's the safest way to do it. But the real traders of it are the ones that are actually buying the coins themselves, or buying Bitcoin and Litecoin, they're owning them themselves. And I think that's really the idea behind this, is that whoever created Bitcoin and started this revolution wanted that independence from the banks. They didn't want this to be a bank asset. Eventually they'll get in there because there's so much money to be made there. But I think the idea of owning it yourself and owning those cryptos yourself is really the premise behind it. And then the idea that you can trade and buy goods. And, a lot of friends and family ask, how can it be a currency if you can't buy anything? And last month I bought a trip on Expedia with Bitcoin. There's many websites, overstock.com. You can buy things with Bitcoin, and it's easy. It's exactly like buying something with a credit card. There's no difference. The first few times I did it, obviously, it was new and it was exciting, but there's no difference than using a credit card with your crypto purchase. So I think that my idea of what will happen is one of these currencies will become, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin will become the currency of a country that wants a currency that can't be so easily manipulated by a dictator. I think that's the next step. Someone, probably somewhere in Africa, they'll take it and they'll have maybe they'll use Bitcoin as their currency, and it'll change the way that country's economy is. And I think the first one in, it'll be new and people will be nervous about it. I think it would be much safer doing that than some of the currencies we've seen in some of these countries. I mean, you look at Venezuela and Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had incredible inflation because their government could just print and print. I think that's going to be the future, as a country is going to take a hold of it and start using it as their currency.
I believe so as well. And where have I heard that also a country can just print and print before? Oh yeah, our own.
I sent a friend, kind of as a joke, Zimbabwe. And people say, oh, this happened in Germany in the 1920s after World War I. It doesn't happen today. I mean, Zimbabwe, I have one. I don't have it here right now, but I have a bunch of these Zimbabwe notes from 2007, and they're $10 billion notes. So it's laughable. They also have a $10 trillion note. So these countries, that was 12 years ago. That's not that long ago that happened. So being able to inflate your money in countries around the world is still happening, and really it's happening here. I mean, if you look at a dollar bill today here in the U.S., it can't buy anything. I mean, you used to be able to buy. You could buy a McDonald's hamburger. You could buy tons of stuff with $1, and now all these things have gone up tremendously. So it's going to be interesting what's going to happen with crypto market now that we've seen the Chicago futures come in. They've gotten more money in it. There's more traders that can actually trade Bitcoin. I think we saw that pullback talking early first quarter, and now things are starting to settle and move back up. Which, as we were talking earlier, it happens every year. I mean, there's always a rise in cryptos. Pretty much every year since 2009.
Yeah, that's what it is, about seeing the trend. And if I can share a Zimbabwe story with you, Collin. I'd made a little money in the tech industry way back in the early 90s when it was just coming up. And I actually traveled to Zimbabwe in 1994. And the exchange rate back then was 10 Zim to $1. And I have those notes, even like a 1 Zim and a 2 Zim note. Those are rare to come by today. You can't find a 2 Zim note anywhere. There's none. There's all like 100 billion notes now. Because you can see the trend. If you can see where the tech is moving, how it's going to benefit society, how it's going to make people's lives more independent, and how people can get away from an older system, how they can tried to expand business. I mean, look at Amazon. They're going to be taking Bitcoin next year payment. So all these things moving forward, this is exactly, it's almost like Tech 2.0 that's coming up with the exact same run-up, utilization, so many aspects that can change our lives. The way we can put something onto the blockchain where we can verify that we own that house, we own this asset, we own something else, or a debt has been paid. There's so many attributes to using blockchain to verify, and then nothing could be miscalculated or defrauded, or when you're going to put a new number in something, it just doesn't work. You're talking about the African currency of a nation taking that on. That would be amazing, because they couldn't print into infinity. If there's a limited number of tokens or coins, you're limited to that number, and then the value just increases from that point. You know, we were talking earlier as well about the Bitcoin IRA, and last time I talked to Charles Thorngren, and at that point you were only talking about Bitcoin IRA, but recently you've added a couple more offerings there. You had Litecoin, Ripple, I think you're adding on there. Can you talk about that for a second?
We just had Bitcoin. Now we have Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum. We're going to have Ripple in a few weeks here. So we have all these products. They're all eligible to be put into an IRA now. We're one of the few companies that can do it in the country. And a lot of people say, why would I want to do that? Why wouldn't I just want to buy it on Coinbase or buy it and keep it myself? I've bought some there also, bought some in different places, different exchanges. I think the real benefit to someone that wants to get into this, number one, if you're not savvy with storage, which a lot of people are uncomfortable with keeping a wallet because they're worried about that wallet being online or stolen, which, obviously, there's been, hackers that have stolen cryptos from different places, so it can definitely happen. Or, someone that just doesn't want to deal with that, we handle all that. So, they have an IRA and they want to get into crypto, they can buy Bitcoin with us. And then the real benefit is, and this is the thing that's going to happen, is that let's say Bitcoin, sitting at 8,000 and it goes to 50,000. You sell it, you keep the money in the IRA, then it's tax deferred. As opposed, if you do the same thing outside of the IRA, guess what? That gain gets added to your income and you have to pay taxes on it that year. And so I think the benefit is being able to move and take that profit when you have that big profit, and you don't have to take that big hit that year. And as much as people say, they're not going to know about it or this or that, all the exchanges, the IRS is tapped into them, Coinbase and all of them. So if you're not reporting your gain, you're going to get a little nice, knock on your door and say, hey, we saw this nice $50,000 gain. We want our people or $25,000 or whatever they're going to get out of it. So doing it within the IRA, let's say you did Ethereum, it went from 500 to 2,000. You can sell it easily, keep the cash in the IRA. And so I think that's something that people that are new to this or people that have IRA money that always wanted to do it, I think they'll find that ease and that tax advantage could really pay dividends, down the road.
Yeah, and speaking of that, when you are talking about the gains that you need to pay off whatever coin or token that you're holding, you are going to eventually be tracked, because what they're putting in the new AI systems to track all the transaction hashes back from start to finish. If you're going to put it through a spinner, great, but that's kind of illegal anyway. The new push is going to be into Anonymity Coins. By the way, this is just a little tip out there. The new movement is to Anonymity Coins. But when we come back into traditional, what you would consider cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, Ripple, walk me through the process. I don't even know what you mean when you say buy an IRA. I actually take the keys into my own possession. So when you're talking about buying an IRA or investing in an IRA, for me, I need help with that. I can help anybody pull the keys and, do everything you're talking about that most people are afraid of, but I'm comfortable with that.
But when you want to shelter that money, so let's say you worked at a company for a while and you got a bunch of money in a 401k, you can roll that with us. We do all the paperwork for a self-directed traditional IRA, or maybe you have a Roth IRA, which obviously a Roth you could really benefit because there's no taxes that you have to pay on the gains. But let's say you have any of these old accounts out there, or you just got a traditional, you move it over to us. We help you with the paperwork. You acquire Bitcoin or Litecoin, Ethereum with us. We have those things stored in cold storage, which is, as you know, is the safest type of storage. So it's stored in cold storage. You own them. They're yours. It's not a fund. And then let's say you just bought one and it went from 8,000 to 50,000. You can call us and sell it, go back into cash in your IRA, and then you would avoid having to pay taxes on that money that year, and then you would just pay it down the road at retirement. It'll be a lower rate because you won't be working at that point. So basically, it's like buying any asset within a retirement account. Just we're able to do it. We're approved. The custodian that we work with got this approved so that we could add some value to someone that wants to acquire crypto safely and really maximize those gains, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I had one question for you then when you just made that statement. When you talk about selling it and then coming into cash, am I able to then rebuy when I find an opportunity? If I think Bitcoin's going to decrease 60% after the next huge run up, and we are going to record prices, this is my own personal opinion. You can agree or disagree. My personal opinion is we are absolutely going to eclipse 40,000 US dollars. But after that, we're going to see a gigantic 50 to 60% decline in that. So if you're looking for a buying and a selling opportunity within this whole sphere in the next 12 months, am I allowed to sell it and then rebuy it and then resell it and buy it as frequently as I want to? Or am I limited with this IRA here? What can I do with it?
Let's say, just to use that simple example, you buy it at 8,000, goes to 50, you go back into cash, and then it pulls back to 20, you want to jump back in. We just do it all over again. It's an easy process. Or if you want to, let's say you go back into cash and you want to buy gold or silver. Maybe the opportunity for gold or silver is there for you and you want to jump into that market. You can easily move that cash into gold and silver with us too. So we can do all of those alternative assets here. It's all under one umbrella, and it's all under your IRA or old 401k. So it's a great opportunity. A lot of people who wanted to get into it maybe didn't realize that, hey, I can use this money that I've had, and they want to get out. Maybe their stock market portfolio is way up, and they feel like, hey, I did great, but now what am I going to do? Because a lot of people, I think, they think because their stock portfolio is up that they are up. You're not up until you take some profit. Because if we see a 2008 scenario, as you mentioned, it drops 40%. Well, guess what? Your gains are gone. They're wiped away. So this gives people an opportunity to take those gains that they've seen in the stock market, move it into, let's say, Bitcoin that a lot of people believe is undervalued, and hopefully take that ride up with cryptos.
And I like the ability to swap over into a metal, because also the persons I'm talking to, when we move into this grand solar minimum, the agricultural shift, shall we say, the grow zones where we traditionally grow our crops right now, they're going to get frozen out. There's some areas that are actually going to go offline on our planet. Northern China being one, Canada being another, Northern Europe being another. And you have to think about the amount of wheat we grow there. So everything is going to need to come indoors or be shifted further south. These grow zones are going to need to push 300 miles south at the bare minimum. And a lot of it's going to involve indoor agriculture. You know, Russia does greenhouses now off of natural gas, and that's great. But the persons we're talking to, when they're talking about vertical farming, a lot of this new wiring and component parts are going to involve silver. So they see a huge drive on silver prices alone just from mitigating and moving and morphing our agricultural grow zones, systems, agricultural output, and the way we do it into indoor facilities, all based on silver as well. So, I mean, there's more than just one play on buying it as like a static metal to hold on to value. You know, I love silver. It's one of my faves. But going forward, it's going to be utilized for so many other things. And when I talk about being one of my favorite metals, you know, I'll share a personal story with you here. When we were kids, my grandparents, when we would have our birthdays, let's say we were 6 years old, they would give us $6 silver. And from that point, you know, you had that emotional attachment to the silver, the money, the feeling of it. It wasn't just a thing, it was actually a treasure. You know, and every year we got different silver dollars, and it became part of my holding. I like to hold it. It's something that reminds me of my childhood. Plus, moving forward in this era, everything's
1964 quarters, and they're 90% silver, And, just talking about inflation, this is a quarter then, now this is worth $4 because of the silver content in it. I keep tons of silver around. My wife, she loves to buy silver. We buy it at least every quarter, if not more. I think it's very undervalued. I mean, when the Hunt brothers cornered the market in the early 80s and it hit $49, and to think now it's 75% lower than that price, and yet we have thousands more uses, it doesn't make sense where the prices are right now for silver.
Yeah, the only thing I can explain that they're actually purposely depressed. And from the persons we know, because of our association with crypto when we ran our ICO, everything seems that it's going to just start to run right now as the food prices go up. Everything's going to be as a DNA strand. Crypto and metals are going to run up because if they give you this feeling of wealth, that everybody just doesn't care if food costs more because everybody feels abundant. Think about the early 90s, the mid 90s. Everybody just felt they were wealthy. There was so much money around. They need to kind of recreate that feeling again to try to deflect you from all the price rises.
People need to get some of that wealth in their hands, and they need to feel like they can afford things again. That's the benefit of what's happening, I think, in these alternative assets is that there's a real potential. I think silver is the most undervalued commodity out there in terms of anything that's valued. When I talk to silver miners, and Charles and I, we go to conferences every year, we talk to miners, and they say silver should be minimum in the mid $25, $30 range for value, just based on the uses, based on how much they pull out of the ground that gets bought. The uses and the demand just never seem to go away. Solar panels, electric vehicles obviously aren't going anywhere. They use silver in the batteries of those vehicles. So the uses, there's just so many uses, as you were mentioning. I think we're going to see a move back to some of these commodities right now, and people are going to flee these sort of scarier investments and move into things that they can understand.
Yeah, think about how many of these countries are also affected with the mining and the political situations, the amount of metals that we're going to get out of the ground. We talk about rare earths. That's nothing to do with this, but the rare earths are also being, consolidated by China, and then there's suddenly shortages if they want to push the political button. So what happens to the same thing if people want to push the political button for the precious metals that are delivered around our planet?
Last year we saw a little bit of a silver shortage. Some of the products that we offer we couldn't get for 30, 45 days. So once you see that run-up happen, people say, oh, there's plenty of these metals out there, but I know as being a dealer, being in this space for a long time, when things start to move and the demand really pushes, when silver breaks 20, 25, we'll have shortages of silver bars and silver coins. We'll always be able to get them, but when you see those run-ups and you see that there's not enough out there, it really makes you understand that these are limited supply items. And that, that's the beauty behind getting into something that's tangible, and there's a limited supply of them out there, is that eventually there won't be enough, and that's when the price really, really will skyrocket.
Yeah, and I'd like to touch on the point as well as crypto investing. When you're trying to determine which coin, which token to go into, the total amount of coins is what you're looking at, or the total amount of tokens. If something that's 21 million or 40 million, 50 million max, compared to something that has 27 billion, there's a very huge difference in the amount. Is it pre-mined? Is it mineable? There's so many different variables going on inside there. But it's the exact same thing, whether it's in the crypto space or the physical space, if you dig in the ground and try to, refine a metal out of it.
The crypto, like Bitcoin, will be similar to that. As the mining continues to slow, because eventually all the coins will be mined by 2040, that'll be the end of it. And that's when we'll see Bitcoin at those, really outrageous prices, because people will want to get those last few coins that are out there. The nice thing about it too is, for people to understand, is that it's easy to trade $15,000 or $12,000. You're going to get 1.23 coin. You don't have to have a full coin when you're buying these things, for anyone that hasn't done it. It is interchangeable, even down to the smallest numbers. They can get those fractions down in terms of the numbers down really low for trading and bartering. And it's really easy to buy items with those coins. I mean, it's almost exactly like buying with a credit card. I think as more people realize that, I think you mentioned Amazon next year accepting Bitcoin. Once that happens, the floodgates are open. That's going to open up Amazon to a whole new buyer pool. Because a lot of people, they're hoarding their coins right now, but eventually they're going to want to use those coins to buy items. They don't want to have to turn it back into dollars because the dollar's losing money. They'd rather just buy the goods and services on Amazon, buy their groceries and whatever they're buying. So once Amazon does that, then I think any retailer that doesn't follow suit would be missing out on a big opportunity. We accept it. If someone wants to buy gold from us, we accept Bitcoin also, and we know that people want to use it to buy things. And even here in California, they're saying that a lot of people are buying homes with Bitcoin. I saw a transaction in Manhattan Beach, right on the beach, beautiful home. I think it was 6.3 million, 6.4 million, and the home was purchased with Bitcoin. So it's definitely moving in that direction.
Yeah, hopefully they sold that at the $20,000 a Bitcoin price.
I hope so too. You never know what their buy-in point was. So most of those early adopters, if they bought it so cheap, it doesn't even matter. I've had some people that bought Bitcoin at 1,000 and recently decided to kind of come back in. They feel like they saw that nice pullback. Bitcoin hit 6,500 about 30 days ago. So they feel like we hit another bottom and they're jumping back in, which is encouraging for me and I think to a lot of investors to see some of them bought Bitcoin at 1,000 and now they're buying it again at 6,500, 7,000, because obviously they see that long-term value in the investment. It's going to be an interesting year.
A couple last points here. You talk about coming in and trying to average buy at 1,000, but some early adopters had gotten Bitcoin at 10 cents. We talk about Ethereum, some people got it at $5. And when we look at the kind of striation going up at 10 cents to 20,000 US dollars compared to $5 to where Ethereum sits now, I mean, Ethereum still has an enormous amount of room to run. And Ripple, if it's going to be adopted by all national banks, international banks across the planet, I mean, what it is valued was 65 cents today. I was looking on CoinMarketCap. That is going to be nothing compared to where it could go if it garners this full global utilization, which I firmly believe it will.
Bitcoin is a little slower to trade. I think it's the first one in and it'll always be around. But really the smart contracts with Ethereum, all those things that we talked about earlier, being able to, let's say, title insurance, which is sort of what you were mentioning, is if you use the Ethereum, the blockchain, the technology, you could basically get away with title insurance because every time a property trades hands, the new buyer would be put on the blockchain and it would just the blockchain would just continue to grow and grow. And I think that technology is going to start to happen. And that's a, multi-billion-dollar industry. Every time someone buys a property, they're dropping anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 for that insurance. And really, if they can just put that in a contract so that when you buy that property, it's yours, that could save people a lot of money, and it can make things a lot smoother in terms of contracts. Ripple, MoneyGram is using Ripple. A lot of the banks like the exchange. It makes exchanges much faster. Banks like faster. They like cheaper, which Ripple does. And so it'll be interesting to see where that technology goes. A lot of smart people behind Ripple. A lot of early Bitcoin adopters that put a lot of money into that token. So I think both of those have the technology behind both of those are going to make those coins really strong. And that's why we're offering those in the IRA.
Yeah, so let's wrap it up here for a moment. You were talking about you have a Bitcoin guide and also a gold IRA guide. Can you explain a little bit how people can find that information and what they can track this down? I mean, we talked about so much tonight. It's kind of overwhelming for people who are just coming into the space here. So what do you have? Having a PDF form that they can, get their hands on and take a slower look at. That's something that explains it in greater detail.
We have the gold guide. We have the crypto guide. We have an Ethereum guide, and then we also have the Government Lies Exposed, which talks about inflation, which we kind of touched on, which was written by an economist, and it breaks down the true inflation numbers and also our government debt and unfunded liabilities. All those guides are available. If they request any guide, they'll get a call, and then the representative will make sure they get all the information. The first thing we do is just try to make sure that they get the right information. They can review it. You can ask us questions. All of our representatives will spend as much time as necessary explaining all this. We know that gold and silver and cryptos are new for a lot of people. They're going to have a lot of questions, and we support people calling and asking any of those questions. We get the free information out, and then, let people decide if it's for them. Education is really important to our company. Charles and I we really focus on it, and that's why we provide these guides. They're all anywhere from 5 to 7 pages each, and I think they do a good job of breaking down everything we kind of talked about into a really simple form. Our Noble Gold and Noble Bitcoin, that's really where we stand out, I think, with our competitors, is that a lot of times people get into it too quick. They don't know what they're getting into, and we really focus on making sure they get all the questions answered.
It could, and I want to make sure I have the right web addresses for you. That would be noblegoldinvestments.com and noblebitcoin.com. Is that correct?
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Talk to you soon.